6 years. And we've been here 2 weeks. But this is not the first time that Miss Karen has been in the same room as the man that killed her daughter. She told you when she testified that she had gone to him, to Zach Adams, described the man who led her daughter into the woods, who took her. And she testified that he said that was shame. From the mouth of Zach Adams, that was shame. April 13th, 2011, Shane Austin took her. Through the woods. They kept her. They raped her in a barn. And then Jason and Zach took her to the river under a bridge. You stand in that place under the bridge, and there's water, there's trees, there's rock, there's cars. They whiz by on the I-40 bridge over the Tennessee River. A bridge that we've all crossed and crossed and crossed. But as you do it, you can't see down to this place at all. There on the rocks next to the river and the trees, stand in that place, you're all alone. All alone. But she wasn't all alone. Wrapped in a blanket under that bridge with the cars whizzing past, she was not all alone. Because two men, two bad men, one stood at her feet and one at her head. And with a shot echoed under that bridge, with a shot that echoed under that bridge, those two men did what they chose to do. In secret, what happened to Holly Bobo started, and it was bonded together between these two men who had just done this terrible, terrible work. I want to come back to the secret. I want to come back to that. But first I want to take a time out. Because just like y'all, I listened to at least an hour of reading. Legal terms, lesser included offenses, and things about the law. There was one thing that was read that I found particularly confusing, even misleading, and I'd rather go ahead and take a time out and talk about it quickly now, and then resume with the secret about what happened to her. You were read an instruction about alibi. And in that instruction, it says, if the defendant was not present when the crime was committed, he cannot be guilty. That's what it says in the alibi instruction. The problem with that is it doesn't account for what we talked about the very first day, which is also in the charge. Remember, we robbed a couple banks that first day, and we did it together. We did it to demonstrate what's also in the charge, which is criminal responsibility for the conduct of another. I was the only one on the scene of the crime. I mean, I walked into the bank and I did it. But my accomplices, whoever planned it, whoever drove away from it, whoever split the money with us, whatever it was, there's no necessity under the law that those people be present at the scene of the crime. The alibi instruction has to be read in light of criminal responsibility. Okay? That's important in this case. We'll come back to it, but I wanted to go ahead and say it because I don't want that misconception out there the whole time everybody talks. Okay? The secret began with a gunshot under the bridge that echoed. These two men bonded together because of the terrible hands-on work that they just put in. But not just these two men, these four men. Zach Adams, Jason Autry, Shane Austin, and Dylan Adams. All criminally responsible for each other. All part of this terrible, terrible, terrible thing. Their secret bonded together. But even in the early days after that shot, secret wasn't kept very good. If somebody had been listening, if somebody had just been listening, they'd realize that secret wasn't even kept through the first 2 weeks of this thing. Within 2 days, Holly's papers are found right there by Shane Austin's trailer. Other of her papers found right there in front of Shane Austin's grandmother's house. Within the first days, Zach Adams is seen by Trooper Rainey running frantically, sprinting, and then by the watchers in the woods vacuuming mattresses and cars for hours after the police talked to him. The fear is that Holly's DNA was on him, and he had transferred it to his mattress or to his car, and he had to get rid of any trace of her. Within the first weeks, a girlfriend that he had lied to and that he had threatened already knew that he had done it. Within the first weeks, he has no alibi at all. Instead, he says he's with Shane and Dylan, the other people who committed the crime. Within the first weeks, Jason Autry tells the lie that I'm working on a farm. But what do you know? Once it's checked, absolutely not. All that within the first weeks of this investigation, if somebody had just been listening. The very day of the abduction, the night after the abduction happened, 911 has to come to his house. You want to know what mental state he's in? He's trying to get guns. He's trying to get a vehicle. He is crazy. Fighting his grandfather? Desperate? Within the first weeks, this secret had crack and crack and crack and crack in it. But nobody was listening. Agent Dykes, Investigation 101. Check their alibis. Check their alibis. But he didn't. Investigator Dykes, follow the facts. Instead, he came up with some theory about sexual predators. Follow the facts. Just the facts. Is that Dragnet? Just the facts. But he wouldn't listen. In those first few weeks, this thing could have been done. But he wouldn't listen. If he had been listening, he could have gone to the people that hung out with Zach Adams. He could have asked Anthony Phoenix, and he would have heard that Zach said, I couldn't have picked a prettier bitch. It was fun. He could have gone to Jamie Darnell, and he would have heard, he said he can't clear his name. He's in too deep. He could have gone to Carl Statler and heard, he said Shane hit it. He said he did it. Could have gone to Cooper and Kirk, the inmates in the lockup, and he could have heard, tell my brother, Dylan, to shut his mouth, or else I'm going to lay him in a hole beside her. They could have heard him say, you got to kill a bitch to get a $2 million bond. They could have heard him say, they have no body, they have no gun. They could have heard person after person after person that hung out with him and was around him. And this already cracked secret could have been done. Finally, the people around Dylan Adams come forward. And when they do, finally, somebody listens. Finally, somebody goes to Dylan Adams. And what do you know? The same names we've been hearing since the second day of the investigation. Zach Adams, Shane Austin, Jason Austrie, Dylan Adams. To Dylan's friends and to Dylan, and we got the same people. This secret wasn't even well kept. Not early on and not later. Except by one man, Jason Austrie. You see, Jason Austrie knew, just as we know, that when he drove up to that trailer and the body, she was in that blanket, and he agreed to help, he was in it for the whole thing. He was in it for the whole thing. He knew that when he agreed to help and took her in that blanket to the river with Zach, that he was just as responsible as Shane Austin, just as responsible as Dylan Adams, just as responsible as Zach Adams for what happened to and what was gonna happen to that girl. She was never gonna come out of that blanket alive. Not a chance. He knew just how guilty he was, just how guilty they all were. And for years, he kept his secret. Until late 2016, when I think the best way to put it is he just told it. He just told it. Two investigators, just like last week on that stand, every question, he just told it. Trip to the river, he just told it. Taking the body in the blanket, her in the blanket, out of the bed of that truck and laying it down on the rocks. He just told it. What he himself called her, the fucking bitch, is still alive. He just told it. When the shot rang out, when Zach killed her while he was not trying to help her, looking out to make sure the coast was clear, he just told it. For a whole day, question after question after question, he just told it. The early cracks in the secret. All the people around Zach. Dylan Adams and his friends. And now the man who was under that bridge with his hands on the blanket that she was in and still alive, he came in here and he just told it. But even more than that, his account is corroborated and corroborated and corroborated. What did he tell us Shane was doing when he pulled up? Y'all got to get out of here. I got a cable guy coming sometime. Well, what do you know? He had a cable guy coming that day. Corroboration. What did he say Zach said about the rape? Other than the crude part that Zach said about Dylan during the rape. But what did he say Zach said about the rape? He said we had to end early because somebody started cutting their grass. We had to get out of there because somebody started cutting their grass. Well, what do you know? Brian Vick, the neighbor to Shane's grandmother, where that barn is, the neighbor, what was he doing that morning? Cutting his grass. Cutting his grass. Jason tells us, later that afternoon, we go to Victor Dinsmore's, well, not his house, he's working at Miss Dottie's house. He says there's a scuffle or a fight. Something about hitting it. And what do you know? Victor Dinsmore describes the same thing that afternoon. But not just that. The particularly interesting part of that is Jason says, you know, Victor was there, but some unidentified, that was his word, unidentified female was there. Well, what do you know? Debbie Doris, the cleaning woman. And what'd she see? Men. Including who? Jason.
Objection, Your Honor. These are main facts on the evidence.
It's up to the jury what the facts are.
What do you know? She saw men. Including who? Jason. Corroborated. Jason tells us how, because he was dropped off at the church. He was dropped off at the church after they came back from the bridge. When the body was disposed of, he wasn't there, and he told us he doesn't know where it was, except that Zach had told him near Kelly's Ridge. So he told us he went out there looking for it one day after this. He said he went up to a house pretending like he was asking to fish, but the people wouldn't let him. Well, what do you know? What do you know? Within 2 weeks of this crime, Miss Brenda Bryant calls in, and it's documented. Strange man in a PT Cruiser just came to my house asking if he could fish, and he was acting strange, and I told him no, and he kept on asking, and I told him no. Well, what do you know? That's exactly what Jason had said. Corroborated and corroborated and corroborated. But even that, there's more. Because what did Jason say in late 2016? Shane Austin and me sold the gun. The gun. No body, no gun. Sold the gun to Victor Dinsmore. Go to Victor Dinsmore. Gun was disposed of over by Joe Holiday Road. Small little street. Years and years and years ago. They sold it to me sometime after Holly was killed. And that's where I got rid of it, me and my wife. And what do you know? The gun. Right there. The man and his wife that Jason and Shane sold it to years and years ago. He is corroborated and corroborated and corroborated. Early cracks. Zach's friends and all the things he said. The friends of Dylan Adams and Dylan Adams. Jason Autry just told it, and he was corroborated and corroborated and corroborated. But even then, there's more. 2 confessions, admissions, while he was in jail to 2 entirely different people. Christopher Swift, who doesn't, is he lying on Zach? Is Christopher Swift lying on Zach? He told us he doesn't even want to believe that Zach is capable of doing this. But nevertheless, he tells you what Zach said. I was there for the worst part of it. I was there for the worst part of it. One of us killed themselves. I was there for the worst part of it. Talking about Holly. And explained later that one of us, Shane Austin, killed himself. Corey Rivers, entirely different person, who sat up straight, bright-eyed, and told us and answered every question about his past, his horrific childhood, what happened to him, what happened to his mother, and it also told us what Zach told him. That he wanted forgiveness for what he had done. That she was taken into the woods. Holly Bobo was taken into the woods. She was killed. That her body was chopped up. The early cracks. All the statements Zach made to his friends. Dylan Adams, Jason Autry. All the corroboration and now 2 confessions to 2 entirely different people. So why'd I have to hear so much in this trial about other things? About all the other people that were investigated and excluded? Why'd I have to hear about, pick a name, Jonathan Dodd, Jason Nickel, whoever it was? Why'd I have to hear about all those people that were investigated and excluded? Why'd I even have to hear about Terry Britt, who Agent Dykes, the one who had tunnel vision on Terry Britt, the one who had to be removed because of his unobjectivity and his tunnel vision. But even him, when I asked, after all those searches, after ripping into this man's life, he's not a good man. Good for them for ripping into his life. Good for them. He's in prison. That's fabulous. But after ripping into his life, after all that, Agent Dykes, what did you find that connected him to this crime? And his answer was what? Absolutely nothing. Not a drop of blood, not a hair, not anything at all that connected him to Holly Bobo. No evidence. No evidence. So why are we even talking about him? And then I had to listen to Johnny Walker, that marshal, cell phone expert? No. An investigator who understands that when you talk to somebody, there's certain things you got to do? No. An investigator that understands that you need to write a report that actually records what happened when you talk to somebody? No. An investigator who remembers that if you're going to testify, you need to probably remember what happened that's in your 20-line little report? No. An investigator that understands when he's being messed with? Terry Britt's not a brain surgeon. But Johnny Walker didn't even understand he was being messed with. Well, it sounds like you got it all figured out. That's from the words of the man that calls law enforcement what? Whores. Well, it sounds like you got it all figured out. He came in here to say that? Johnny Walker came in here to say that? Why don't, Mr. Walker, you look at the evidence? Why don't you look at the evidence? Were you aware, Mr. Walker, that as we sit here right now, we've heard 7, 8, 9 people say what Zach Adams said about killing her? Mr. Walker, as you sit here right now, do you know we've heard 2 different people, entirely different people, testify about how he confessed to them? Mr. Walker, as we sit here right now, do you know they went to Dylan Adams' friends? Do you know they went to Dylan? Do you know Jason just sat in this courtroom for a whole day and just told it? Did you know that his entire story corroborated? No. Yet we had to listen to it. Don't tell me about that. Don't tell me about that. Don't tell me about the 4 times in 3 years that Terry Britt searched bad porn. Don't tell me about that. Tell me about the facts and the evidence in this case. We spent way too much time on speculation that had already been shot down, on suspects that had already been shot down. And we even heard Agent Dykus himself admit from his suspect, Terry Britt, that we found, quote, absolutely nothing. Two things. The math. The math in this case is actually pretty simple. The only question in this case is, do you have the right people? Because everyone agrees. She was taken, she was kidnapped, and that kidnap started when she was taken, and it continued all the time until she was killed. That she was taken, that she was kidnapped, that she was raped, and that she was murdered. You just listened for an hour about lesser included offenses or something like that. I heard crazy stuff, like negligent homicide or like sexual battery. I heard crazy stuff, and the only things at issue in this trial are not whether or not she was murdered, because she was. Not whether or not she was murdered in the perpetration of a felony, because she was. Not whether or not she was kidnapped, because she was. Not whether or not she was raped, because she was. The only question is, do we have the right people? And the math on that is pretty simple. 4 people. Zach Adams, Jason Autry, Dylan Adams, Shane Austin. 4 people. 1 killed himself. The one at the coon hunt. The one looking at him. The one with the hidey holes behind his house. The one with the paper 75 yards from his front yard. The one with the heat coming down on him. 1 killed himself. Dylan Adams. They went to his friends. They went to him. And what do you know? After they did, got the right people. Jason Autry. He just sat in here and told it. You got the right people. Zach Adams. Karen Bobo. Face to face with him. In the same room. The man that took her into the woods. And he said, that was Shane. That was Shane. He didn't say, I don't know who that was. He didn't say, oh, that was, pick a name. Pick a name that we've heard. Doesn't matter. James Barnes. He didn't say it was Terry Britt. He didn't say, I got no idea. He said, that was Shane Austin. 4 people. 4 people. Do we got the right people? You can go one by one by one by one. And the second thing. In any case, there's details that matter and then details that don't. We talked about that the first day, what color shirt people were wearing or exactly what time something happened. We talked about any case has all sorts of details, but some details can be real important. It was just 2 more witnesses. There was so many witnesses that got on the stand, but it was just like the others, 2 more witnesses. And you may not have caught how important what they said was. Cooper was the inmate who was sitting in the Chester County lockup. He was the one who was going to be transferred to Obion County. Kirk was the inmate who was sitting further, waiting to come to court. That's Cooper and that's Kirk. Cooper described how Zach Adams came into that lockup, asked him if he would be able to talk to the federal prisoners in Obion County. He said, yeah, maybe through the door. Zach says, we'll get a message to my brother. Tell him to stop talking or else I'll lay him in a hole next to Holly Bobo. Kirk hears the same thing. Here's Zach talking to Cooper. But do you know what else they both hear that they told you? They both heard Zach say, because remember, Cooper didn't want him saying this to him. He said, I got angry with him and maybe even I threatened to slap him if he didn't stop talking. But he didn't stop talking. He said, not worried or something to that effect because they got no body and they got no gun. Remember that? Not just from Cooper, but from Kirk. They got no body and they got no gun. Well, when did that happen? When did that conversation happen? They testified it happened on March the 4th. March the 4th of 2014. March the 4th of 2014. March the 4th of 2014. When was her body found? When was her body found? September of 2014. So his first statement makes sense. They got no body because in March of 2014, they didn't have a body. But what else did he say? They got no gun. Who on earth, on this planet, who on earth knew on September, in March, before September, who on this planet knew in March of 2014 that she had been shot? Who knew it? Her body hadn't been found. This didn't exist yet. This was still in the woods. The hole in the back of her head is a bullet hole that's consistent with the 32 that I got laying on that table didn't exist yet. Nobody in this world knew if she was strangled, if she was stabbed, if she was run over, and certainly not shot. Nobody in this world knew except the 2 men who were there when it happened. You want to talk about a confession? In March, before the body's even found, while everybody in this world has no idea what happened to Holly Bobo and how she died, he's talking about a gun. He's talking about a gun 4 months before we even know that she has been shot and has a bullet hole to the back of her head. Under that bridge, you're all alone. You're all alone. The cars whiz by, they can't see a thing. Under that bridge, she wasn't alone though, because she had 2 men, and they had a gun, and they killed her. Only 2 men in the world knew that. The 2 men that did it, Zach and Jason. And Zach's taunt in March, before that body's found, tells you everything you need to know. He spent time in this trial almost like a time machine, going back to 2013 and the status of the investigation, for whatever reason, of 2013. But this isn't 2013. This is 2017. And now, 6 years later, and 2 weeks in this room with the man that killed her daughter, it's time to do what is right. It's time to listen to the evidence, to make decisions on the evidence, what matters. Time's now. Time is now. Shane took her, just like Zach said. Was Dylan with them? Was Zach with them too? But after Shane took her, they all raped her. They all still had her kidnapped. Zach and Jason drove her to the river where they killed her. Then they drove real fast back, dropping Jason off at the church. Just like the defense's own cell phone expert said, the phones are consistent with Shane Austin taking her going to Yellow Springs where that barn is and being raped. And then Jason and Zach going to the river. Dylan getting rid of her phone and her property. Killing her. And coming back real fast. Dropping Jason off out of all things church. It's time for this thing to end.